Hello, so my name is Sebastian Pereira. I'm from NFT DAO. My project is called Cardano Smart. So Cardano Smart is a bot that is looking to solve three major problems that exist in the Cardano ecosystem. First, that it is difficult to find reliable information. So most of the documentation is split between the three founding entities, and that documentation has a lot of problems. There are several links that are broken. There are repositories that are not updated, so they are not useful anymore. And there are basically many dead ends when you're trying to look for development tools. And finally, there are no good code examples for people that want to create apps. So in order to tackle all of these problems, we have created Cardano Smart. Cardano Smart is a wrapper that uses a large language model in order to take documentation from the Cardano ecosystem and generate examples. So what it does, it takes the documentation, it saves the documentation in a vectorial database. The vectorial database organizes the information for the large language model to use when it is training. And finally, that documentation is presented to the users via prompts, right? So it is a follow-up bot. So that means that when you ask a question to the bot, it remembers what you asked previously. So you can continuously ask things like, for example, you could ask, give me an example of an NFT using Bluetooth TX. So it will give the example. Then you can ask a follow-up saying, can you modify the NFT to use Bluetooth V2? So it would understand the previous one that you're referring to the previous example and generate a new one, basically with a new prompt. So there are 5 steps to how this works. First, the user chooses the documentation it wants the bot to consume, right? So it could be anything from examples from Bluetooth TX, the documentation on the Cardano repository, or the documentation on Icon, something like that. The system scraps all of the information, organizes it in the vectorial databases. Then it uses a large language model in order to create examples. Now, this is a wrapper because the LLM we are using is called Mistral. Mistral is open source, but if another team wanted to use something like ChatGPT, that is a paid model, then they could just swap it, use ChatGPT, but obviously they will need to pay for that subscription, right? So we chosen to go with Mistral because Mistral is open source, unlike the competitors. And finally, when the process is over, then the prompts can be asked to the bot. So at the moment, our bot supports on-chain, Icon, and Bluetooth TX, right? So Icon is a third party. Bluetooth TX was created by IOG. And for off-chain code, it supports Lucid. We are working to add in the future BlueTS, that is a TypeScript version. Plutarch. Plutarch is Haskell, only a little bit more complex than Bluetooth TX. And Mesh and Atlas finally. So thank you. Yeah, no, the answer is no. If you scrape only the information in Catalyst, the model would only reply different mixes of the proposals, so it would never add anything new. If you wanted to give any original or useful answers in that context, you would need to use a model that was trained with a larger set of data, like, for example, ChatGPT, that is basically trained with Twitter and Instagram, a bunch of other sources. That kind of bot could give you some opinions or at least something that approaches a review, but still wouldn't be very, very useful. So in the context of usability, the answer is no. But the more these models advance, the harder it's going to get to detect if anyone is just using models to do the reviews and not actually putting the work. So I think in the future, even if the reviews are not useful, they're just going to replace the regular people because it's much easier to do, especially if you're trying to get the reward, right? Maximizing how many reviews you can do in the allotted time. Yeah, so we are in the tools category, so there we can only create things that are open source. So what's going to happen is we're going to create this wrapper and we're going to use all of the open source models in order to present it. And it's going to be in a repository that people can clone and they can use it. So it's going to be totally free to use. We are going to create an instance of the bot for ourselves that is going to be hosted. And for 3 months, we're going to offer the free access to that instance. But after that, it will be subscription-based for the community. But again, if anyone wants to just create their own bot, they can just go to the repository, clone it, and use it that way. Yeah, so for our model, we have scrapers that go through the repositories of IOG, Murgo, and less so the Cardano Foundation. And every time there is a change to the repositories, it gets logged into our vectorial database, and that way we know the bot is updated. Those changes are not going to reflect in the repository where we are going to host the bot, because that would be very expensive. So it will be up to every team that gets the clone repository to create their own way to update the documentation. How often do you update the model? So the model automatically updates every time we boot it. So every time we boot it, it goes to all of the repositories it has already saved and looks for changes and downloads the changes. So basically every time you launch it, it already self-updates to whatever is the new stuff. What happens when an original material link is no longer working? When there is a dead link, we get a warning saying that this particular repository or this particular source of documentation is dead. So we will need to manually look for a replacement, or depending what is the case. What happens when it goes from IOG to the intersect? Well, that change is just going to be the owners and permissions of the repository. The repository itself is just going to be the same address, so it wouldn't be a problem in that sense. No, because we use ChatGPT is an LLM model that obviously is private and you have to pay for it. So we don't use that. We use a French similar idea that's called Mistral, but that one is open source. So once you use that model, you don't have to pay anyone, but you do have to get your own data to train it. Yeah, if you ask it to do something like, can you mint an NFT using Icon, it's gonna give you the code for that. And then if you ask it, can you give me the off-chain code in Lucid to mint an NFT using the previous contract, it does that. And then you can test it obviously first in the testnet, but yeah, it should work.